What if I told you a single trade deal could completely redraw the world map? Not with armies, but with economics. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about with the massive new agreement between India and the European Union. This thing took nearly 20 years to hammer out, and it's poised to create a global powerhouse like we've never seen before. I'm not making this up. Leaders on both sides are literally calling it the mother of all deals. And you know what? That's not just some political soundbite. It's a very clear signal of just how ambitious this is. They're aiming to build a bloc so big, it completely changes the global balance of power. So let's just wrap our heads around the numbers here. At its heart, this deal is creating one of the biggest single markets on the entire planet. We're talking about a combined population of almost 2 billion people. Just think about that. 2 billion people, all brought together under one massive trade agreement. And all those people? Well, they bring some serious economic muscle to the table. Together, this new India-EU bloc represents about a quarter of the world's entire GDP. I mean, by any measure you want to use, that is an absolute economic titan. Okay, so here's the crucial part. An agreement this huge, one that was totally stuck in the mud for almost 2 decades, doesn't just happen by magic. It gets forced into existence by some really powerful global pressures. So the real question is, what were they? Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? After all those years of failed negotiations and going nowhere, why now? What on earth changed to finally push these two giants into each other's arms? To really get it, we gotta look at the long, rocky road that got us here. So the whole thing kicked off way back in 2007, but by 2013, it had completely ground to a halt, and the sticking points were massive. Europe wanted India to slash its huge tariffs on cars, but India wasn't having it. But then, by 2022, the whole world was a different place, wasn't it? The pandemic, the war in Ukraine, it all forced a reboot. But this time, it was driven by a completely new geopolitical reality. And that new reality, it really boils down to 2 huge pressures that were pushing both sides together. First, the return of aggressive America-first trade policies. And second, a shared feeling that they both needed to diversify their economies and rely a little less on China. And you can really see the catalyst right here. I mean, when the United States starts slapping tariffs as high as 50% on some of your goods, suddenly the EU starts looking like a very stable, very essential partner. It kind of created this siege mentality in both Brussels and New Delhi, and a deal went from being just a nice idea to an absolute necessity for survival. So, with all that pressure building up, how did they finally break the deadlock? Well, it all came down to one single great economic trade-off, a really pragmatic bargain that sits right at the very heart of this entire agreement. And here it is, the core of the bargain, laid out plain and simple. India gave up something huge. It agreed to lower the walls around its heavily protected car market. And in return, the EU gave India 2 things it has wanted for a very long time: zero-duty access for its massive textile industry and, this is crucial, easier visas for its skilled professionals. Let's break this down, because this is where you can see how cleverly the whole thing was balanced. The auto deal you see is framed as a win-win. Textiles, that's a huge victory for India. In services, another win-win. India gets to send its talent, and the EU gets to fill some critical labor shortages. And, maybe most important of all, look down at the bottom, agriculture. India protected its red line, which made the whole deal politically possible back home. Okay, the auto deal was the absolute key that unlocked everything else. For decades, India had this tariff wall that was over 100% high. This deal smashes it down to 40%. But, and this is clever, only for cars above a certain price, so it protects India's own mass-market car makers. And here's the masterstroke. Electric vehicles are totally excluded for 5 years. This gives India's own EV industry some much-needed breathing room to grow before it has to face global competition. So that's the big picture, but you and I both know a deal like this is all about the details. Who are the actual winners on the ground? And what was just so sensitive that it had to be left out of the deal entirely? To really understand the impact, I want to tell you a story about a city called Surat. This place, it cuts and polishes 90% of the world's diamonds. It is the global hub. But it was thrown into an absolutely devastating crisis by US tariffs and sanctions on Russian diamonds, which happens to be what Surat specializes in. And that crisis had a real human cost. We're talking about an estimated 150,000 jobs lost as factories shut down and exports to the US just dried up. The entire industry was on its knees. And this is where the deal became a rescue package. By completely eliminating all tariffs on gems and jewelry, it created this frictionless, zero-duty corridor straight to Antwerp, the heart of the world's diamond trade. This lets Surat totally bypass the US tariffs, giving the industry an absolutely essential lifeline back to stability.
Now, what's not in the deal is almost as important as what is. Both sides were pragmatic and agreed that agriculture was a red line. The EU dropped its long-running demand for access to India's super-sensitive dairy market. That move would have been politically impossible for India, so carving that out was essential to getting this whole thing done.
But look, this agreement was never just about the money. To protect this massive new trade relationship in an increasingly unstable world, they also signed a security and defense partnership on the very same day. And that elevated this from just a business deal to a full-blown strategic alliance.
And we're not talking about small stuff here. This means joint naval patrols to keep the sea lanes safe, building military gear together, plugging India into Europe's defense supply chain, and sharing deep intelligence on threats like cyber attacks. It's a direct answer to a world that feels a lot more dangerous these days.
So, when you put it all together, the economics, the security, the pure massive scale of it all, what does it actually mean for the global order? Are we watching something totally new emerge from this partnership? Probably the best way to think about it is with this phrase, strategic autonomy. For both India and the EU, this deal is a powerful declaration of independence. It's them saying, hey, we are not going to be pawns in someone else's game. We're charting our own course. Which, of course, leaves us with one final fascinating question. In a world that seems to be breaking up into these rival American and Chinese-led blocs, have these two democratic giants just linked arms to create a stable, rules-based third option for the rest of the world? It's a profound thought, and honestly, the answer is going to shape the 21st century.